So, you wanted to kind of get a better understanding around this really, really tragic event that happened in Otero, Spain, and specifically kind of the social and cultural context of gender-based violence. It's a tough one. There's no question we're going to be taking a deep dive into a recent article from Cadena Ser to try and unpack it all.
Yeah, it's a chilling reminder that even in small, seemingly quiet, tight-knit communities like Otero, these horrific events can occur. The Cadena Ser article paints a very chilling picture of a very public argument that escalated into violence. A mother fleeing to a local bar for help, saying that her partner had just shot and killed her daughter.
Yeah, the ages involved are really, really striking. You've got a 17-year-old daughter, a 36-year-old mother, and a 45-year-old perpetrator. And it really drives home the devastating impact that this has had, not just on the immediate family, but on the entire community.
Absolutely, and this case is particularly complex. The Guardia Civil have confirmed that they're treating it as the potential case of gender-based violence, but the couple was newly married and had recently moved to Otero.
It makes it even more difficult to comprehend, right? This idea of a new start, a fresh start that they were looking for. You would think those early days would be filled with hope and not this kind of horror.
It challenges, I think some of our assumptions about where and when violence to occur. It highlights the fact that danger doesn't always present itself in predictable ways. Sometimes it erupts even in, seemingly new relationships, making it even more challenging to anticipate and prevent.
Yeah, and then to add another layer of complexity, right? The article mentions that there were no prior reports of violence against the perpetrator in this specific relationship.
Right, and this brings us to a really critical point about the limitations of relying solely on reported cases to understand the full scope of domestic violence. It's often a very hidden issue, shrouded in secrecy and shame.
So how do we even begin to address a problem that often goes unreported? I mean, it feels like we're almost trying to fight like an invisible enemy.
Right, I mean, we have to consider the cyclical nature of abuse, the fear that keeps victims trapped, the societal pressures that often silence them. The article does mention that the mother had filed reports against previous partners.
Yeah, that's a detail that I found particularly striking when I was reading through the article. It makes you wonder about the patterns of abuse, the warning signs that might have been missed, and how we can better support victims who have a history of experiencing violence.
It points to a much larger issue, I think, these systemic factors that contribute to gender-based violence. It's not just about individual perpetrators. It's about societal norms, power imbalances, and really a culture that sometimes tolerates or even excuses violence against women.
The mayor of Otero actually spoke about this. He spoke about the shock and disbelief that's kind of rippling through the community. I mean, in a town of just over 400 people, this kind of event has got to feel like just a complete upheaval.
Absolutely. And, I think the planned community vigil speaks volume. It's not just about mourning the loss of this young woman. It's about collective action, a community coming together to say, no more. And there's real power, I think, in that shared grief and outrage. And it could be a real catalyst for change.
But is a vigil enough, I mean, how do we actually translate that collective grief and outrage into meaningful action that can prevent future tragedies?
That's the million-dollar question, right? I mean, we need to move beyond these reactive measures and really focus on preventing.
And how do we do that?
Well, we need to address the root causes of gender-based violence. We need education that challenges, harmful stereotypes and really promotes healthy relationships and boundaries. We need education that challenges, harmful stereotypes and really promotes healthy relationships and boundaries.
You're talking about like changing attitudes and behaviors, which is a long-term strategy, right? But what about like more immediate solutions, like increasing police presence in rural communities, as some have suggested?
It's not a simple solution. Increased police presence might make some people feel safer in the short term, but it doesn't address the underlying issues, right? And frankly, it could be a Band-Aid solution that just kind of masks deeper societal problems.
So we're back to that question of how do we create lasting change? If it's not just about law enforcement, where do we even begin?
It has to be a multifaceted approach. We need to invest in support services for victims. We need to make legal recourse more accessible. And we need to really challenge the cultural norms that allow this violence to persist.
The article did mention that both the president of Castilla-La Mancha and the Spanish delegate to the region issued statements condemning the crime. It feels like there's at least a growing awareness of this issue at those higher levels of government.
Awareness is a start, but it has to translate into concrete action, right? It's about allocating resources, implementing effective policies, and really holding perpetrators accountable. Words without action are hollow.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the statistics, the headlines, the policy debates. But at the heart of this is a young woman whose life was cut tragically short. Her story needs to be more than just a statistic.
Absolutely. It's about remembering the human cost of gender-based violence. We need to honor her memory by working toward a future where this doesn't happen again.
Reading about the community's response, the shock, the disbelief, the planned vigil, I keep coming back to that question of prevention. Could this tragedy have been prevented?
That's a question that haunts all of us, I think, and there's no easy answer. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, tragedy strikes. But that doesn't mean we give up, right? It means we redouble our efforts.
So how do we do that? How do we turn this tragedy into a catalyst for real, lasting change?
It starts with each of us, I think. We need to be willing to have those sometimes uncomfortable conversations, challenge those harmful attitudes, and support those in need.
Educate ourselves, educate our children, create a culture where violence against women is simply unacceptable.
It's a monumental task, but it's not insurmountable. I mean, we've seen progress, right? We've seen progress in the recent years, and that gives me hope.
What kind of progress are you talking about? Are we actually moving in the right direction? What kind of progress are you talking about? Are we actually moving in the right direction?
Well, I think we're seeing more open dialogue about gender-based violence. There's definitely increased awareness, more resources for victims, and a growing understanding, I think, of the complexities of this issue.
Yeah, it does feel like these issues are finally getting the attention they deserve. But how do we make sure that this momentum continues? That we don't just slip back into complacency.
Yeah, it requires sustained effort and vigilance. We can't let these conversations fade away. We have to keep pushing for that systemic change, holding our leaders accountable, and challenging the status quo.
So where does this leave us? We've explored the tragic events in Otero, the complexities of gender-based violence, and the urgent need for action. But what does this all mean for you, our listener? How can we actually apply these insights to our own lives and communities?
It starts with recognizing that this isn't just a women's issue, right? It's a societal issue that affects everyone. And we all have a role to play in creating a safer, more equitable world.
So what does that look like, in practice? What can we actually do to make a difference?
Well, we can start by challenging those harmful attitudes and stereotypes, in our own circles. We can educate ourselves about the different forms of gender-based violence and the resources that are available to victims. We can support those organizations that are working to combat this issue.
It sounds like you're talking about changing the culture, creating a society where violence against women is simply unthinkable.
Exactly. It's a long-term goal, but I think it's an achievable one, right? I mean, we've seen cultural shifts happen before, and we can do it again.
This deep dive has been, both heartbreaking and hopeful, I think. We've confronted that really dark reality of gender-based violence, but we've also explored the potential for change. And it's a reminder that even in the face of tragedy, there's always hope.
Hope is essential, but it has to be coupled with action. We can't afford to be passive bystanders. We need to be active participants in creating the world that we want to see.
And as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this question. What one action will you take today to contribute to a world free from gender-based violence? It can be something small, a conversation with a friend, a donation to a worthy organization, or simply a commitment to just be more aware.
Every action, no matter how small, ripples outward. And it's in those ripples that change begins.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's sparked some critical thinking and inspired you to be a part of the solution.